good morning, good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your super early breakfast time, I guess, in Ali's case, your lunchtime, your dinner time, or whatever time with us. And special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, LawVu, and our fantastic presenters today, Noah Waisberg, Scott Millea, Christina Wojcik, and Ali Meredith, who are going to teach us all about AI for in-house counsel, proven strategies for safe and successful adoption. This is our 58th webinar of the year, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time, or have you tuned in to an IHC webinar before? Let's get to today's program. Again, rockstar panel, starting with Noah Waisberg. Prior to leading Zuva's spinout, Noah was the CEO of Kira Systems, which is the leading contract analysis company for professional services firms. From founding its sale to Latera in 2021. Before that, he was a corporate lawyer at Weil Gotshal. Among other awards, he was named the Financial Times Intelligent Business Market Shaper and ILTA's Vendor Thought Leader. He's the co-author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, AI for Lawyers, and author of Robbie the Robot Learns to Read, perhaps the first children's book on machine learning. You definitely have to put the links in the chat this time, Noah. So welcome, Noah. Next, we're lucky to have Scott Millea. Scott is an experienced in-house attorney with a diverse background, including higher education, software, and retail experience. He's a skilled contract negotiator driven by data and technology with a special interest in machine learning and generative AI. He is currently associate counsel at Northern Tool and Equipment. Next, we're very lucky to have Christina Wojcik. Christina began her career, her journey with AI at IBM, looking at potential use cases for the recent Jeopardy champion Watson. She then joined Seal Software and focused on building a new category of contract analytics software for law departments, leveraging machine learning, natural language processing, and latent semantic indexing. She was able to leverage this experience and deliver an AI for Elite program when she was Director of Innovation and Technology at Citibank. Currently, Christina is the Managing Director at LexFusion, where she supports a collective of world-class legal innovation companies and partners with law departments to evaluate and curate the ever-growing legal tech and services world. And last, but certainly not least, is Ali Meredith. Ali's the Director of Product Partnerships with LawVu, where she helps LawVu's customers get access to the best legal tech solutions directly from within their LawVu legal workspace. Prior to LawVu, Ali worked for startups, law firms, and ALSPs around the world, helping lawyers leverage AI-powered solutions to accelerate their impact. Again, rockstar panel, super thrilled to have everybody here. Ali, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Shai. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and especially a huge welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights today. This is going to be a great session, and we're so lucky to have you. So we're really going to focus in on practical tips on how you can implement AI yourself in your legal team. And also the second sort of stream to it is how you can enable your wider business to leverage AI safely and responsibly. So we know that efficiency is the number one priority for legal teams around the world, especially in-house legal. You have this pressure to be more efficient, to do more with less. We know staffing is a challenge. It's hard to retain staff and have a legal team that is sufficiently staffed. And we also know that lawyers spend a huge amount of time on administrative work rather than the core strategy work. So reducing that burden is critical. So the format for today is to focus in on question. This key question is, how can AI help in-house lawyers amplify their impact? And to do that, we're going to talk about it in terms of a framework for leveraging AI and empowering your wider organization to leverage AI as well. And that framework has four sort of key pillars to it, or parts. The first one is learning. So how can you learn more about what AI is? And how is that going to help you leverage it and help you become a better in-house counsel and better, more efficient, but also better able to advise your business on the use of AI, the safe use of AI. The second key pillar to that is, how can you apply it? So once you've done that learning and you understand what AI is and how it's going to benefit you, how can you take that to the problems or the challenges that you're facing in your day-to-day business and apply it, so that you're leveraging and sourcing the best tools for your unique challenges? and you're not wasting time sort of buying into the hype or sourcing solutions that aren't going to actually add any value. The third pillar, enable, is how do you take the knowledge that you've learned and how do you use that to enable your wider business to go about using AI safely? So we know that there are risks involved with the use of AI, especially generative AI. It's largely unknown at this point, left sort of unmonitored or unsupervised. There's a risk for data security breaches if you're using AI that's sort of exposing your data. So definitely needs some stringent governance around that, but how do you best do that? And how do you put that in place? And how do you sort of work with your leadership team on that and the wider business? And then the fourth pillar is measuring success. So how do you know that using AI is good? How is it working? Is it actually making you more efficient or is it just a time suck? And in terms of, I know lately, especially, there's been a whole lot of talk around accuracy. How do you measure accuracy? How do you make sure that the AI is not hallucinating? And so we can delve into sort of some of those topics, how to make sure you're actually getting real value from the AI you're using. So to kick us off, we're going to start with the learn pillar. And we have a poll. So just to get sort of a gauge from the audience on where you are at in your journey. Have you done any learning? Have you done no learning? Have you done a lot? Where are you sort of sitting right now? And the first panelist that we're going to hear from is Scott, who is going to talk to us about his journey in learning about AI and his legal team at Northern Tool. So Scott, just to get started, and sorry for picking on you to go first, but your experience is so valuable and so interesting, I think. So are you able to share a little bit about how you went around learning about AI? Why did you decide to upskill? How did you do it? You're on a small legal team, resource constrained, I'm assuming, because you serve a huge business, stores all over the States. So how did you find the time and why did you think it was important to upskill and how did you do it?
Yeah, sure. Happy to be picked on first. No worries there. Good to see all the people in here. It's obviously a hot button topic right now. And I guess, to answer the first question on why I did it, maybe a little bit out of self-preservation, both for myself and for our business at Northern Tool and our legal team as a whole. And what I mean by that is, for example, my general counsel, she had attended a conference where they were marketing an AI tool that could negotiate contracts for you. And that's, a fair portion of my job. So alarm bells start going off, trying to get in front of this. How do I understand this? How do I get my head around this? Both to know kind of what these tools are doing in the background so that I can better leverage them for my own productivity and for our team's productivity, but also for other areas of the business that are also being marketed these tools. It's not just legal teams, it could be, marketing is a huge area, retail planning, real estate, all these areas are getting marketed tools. And in my position where I'm negotiating with these vendors, for me, it was important to kind of understand what's going on in the background. So I just got on the Google machine and started researching places I could learn. CLEs are an option. Obviously, webinars like this, are a good option to learn. I ended up tracking down a course through Great Learning and MIT, kind of their professional ongoing education program. And basically, it was an online course, a 12-week course where they taught you about kind of the background operations behind machine learning and artificial intelligence. They kind of cut you loose on how some of that mapping works in the background, looking at data sets, how to clean them. I won't get super technical into it, but it was a great learning experience. And it just really showed me, how much has gone into these systems. And so understanding it from a risk standpoint when I'm negotiating or when I'm looking at these tools for using in our team, learning about how some of that background technology works was super valuable in helping to manage and mitigate some of those risks as we move forward with these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, because if you're negotiating, then you can't really negotiate effectively if you don't understand what the tool is doing.
Right. Yeah, it just makes it difficult. There might be certain things that you would have in a contract, from a data privacy perspective, or might not have in a contract, depending on what type of tool you're working with, what sort of data it's exposed to. Is it totally internal data? Is there public data available? Is there consumer information that's being put in there? All of those things are concerns. And if you understand how it works in the background, you can kind of get a little idea for, how the tools themselves manage that data. What happens to them? What happens to the data once it's put in one of these tools? So yeah.
It's fascinating, Scott. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to throw to Christina now, because I know at City you trained significant legal team. 200 was the number I had.
You added one more zero to the 200 and you're closer to the size of our organization. However, within that, we had a smaller group that actually went through the training, but happy to talk more about that.
Yes, please.
So when I joined Citibank, I came in with a little bit of a head start. I mentioned I had experience in the AI space, particularly as it was for extracting information from documents, in particular contracts. And the first thing that I did was I wanted to really understand where Citi was with its AI journey. Where is the gap? How are we using today? Are we using it today? Is there any technology within the organization that either legal's using or that legal could potentially use? Because onboarding technology at a complex, highly regulated organization takes a lot of time. And so then I quickly realized that there was a pretty significant opportunity for upskilling, but it had to be a multidimensional approach because no one operates within a complete silo within an organization. So if upskilling only occurred within legal, what happens at the intersection of business and legal? What happens with just the business component? Because if there's a regulatory change and the business has information that needs to have particular pieces extracted for legal to respond to, we need to make sure that the business has that opportunity to extract the information that legal needs in order to have those responses. Otherwise, a lot of the burden and cost shifts from one place to another within the organization. Procurement. So the legal organization that's supporting the procurement team in negotiating contracts with third-party vendors that are leveraging AI. I thought it was important for them to understand what AI is and is not, so that way they can help better negotiate contracts in line with kind of the deliverables that AI can bring, as well as put the right risk and control framework around those relationships. And then just procurement itself, right? Because oftentimes with vendor agreements, you have to get back into those documents to understand what that relationship is, what your remedies might be, and what your reactions to world events can be based on what the contract dictates. So it's really important for me, when I was going through this process, to have the kind of the buy-in as well as include as many people throughout the organization as possible. So what I ended up doing was building a legal department of the future program with AI for legal being a key focus. This is about 5 years ago now. So we're talking the world of predictive AI more so than generative AI, but we eventually made our way to generative AI and really focused on the identification and extraction of information within documents and particularly contracts. And we had to go through a process of getting leadership buy-in. We had to go through a process of getting budget. And I have to say the Citibank leadership team within the legal organization was fantastic. The general counsel was incredibly supportive. The legal management committee was incredibly supportive. I mean, they brought me on board to do innovation. So if I can't do innovation, then, my time there would have been much more limited. My managing director is an innovation visionary and carved out budget to kick off this program. And then from there, we got to work. We selected an AI solution. We brought it in-house. We developed a training program. We started a marketing campaign, which kind of kicks off a change management program. We ended up holding like 15-minute coffee breaks with demonstrations and showing outcomes and just trying to create hype within the legal department in order to get a successful launch of the training program. And then ultimately, within year one, we had over 300 members of the legal department go through the program. We probably had another 150 plus people outside of legal go through the program. And we really started to see kind of that interconnectivity between legal, the business, procurement in leveraging AI in order to meet whatever specific questions or outcomes they were looking to generate. But yeah, it's definitely a multi-tier process and multi-dimensional process to get something like that moving.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how complex that operation is to train 2,000 people and to just, you talked a bit about like the need to build the hype around it and switch from, I think I'm sort of reading into it now, but switch from that fear thing around AI is going to take my job to more of the AI is actually a valuable tool to be used.
Absolutely, right? It's trying to remove all that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and just show it as another tool within an arsenal of tools that our legal department can have access to. And there's very few people who will raise their hand and say, you know what, I do want to review 60,000 contracts manually, right? There's a lot more people who say it would be wonderful if someone or if a technology could at least do the first pass so I could focus my attention on the relevant population of documents, the relevant population of that particular metadata or provision that I'm looking for, and really apply my intellect to a much narrower scope.
Yeah, that's an excellent segue, Noah, because no one knows about reviewing 60,000 contracts more than you, I would imagine. So you've sort of
Christina's pretty good on because of her previous job. Christina's also probably good on reviewing 60,000 agreements, but yeah.
So from the other side of the fence, I know you were originally a lawyer and then you switched to Kira. You made the leap well before AI was sort of even on anyone's radar, really. So from the other side of the fence, being the vendor, sort of trying to upskill teams on AI, can you share a little bit about that journey? Like, what has changed from when you were doing this 10 years ago, 15 years ago? When was Kira founded?
2011. So yeah, coming on, yeah, it's a while. Yeah, I
15
think
years.
so once upon a time, I remember the technology we built with Kira and that we still sell a different version of with Zuva for a kind of more focused use case is technology that can find information in contracts and pull it out, right? So for example, like there's a feature in LawVu where if you're trying to get details out of your contracts, instead of like having to find them all yourself, you can use our technology as it's sort of presented in LawVu and it'll find the information automatically. So another example, if you're doing an M&A deal and you need to find assignment and change of control clauses, and if any of the contracts have like exclusivity or non-competes, the technology will do that. And I remember in like 2011, 2012, 2013, you would go and talk to partners at law firms or in-house lawyers or partners at accounting firms, and you'd sort of show them the technology working and they'd be like, how did it do that? Right? Like, or this one thing where someone's like, I just paid 50 grand for someone to do that. An in-house lawyer was like, I just paid 50 grand to have, a firm do that. Like, how did this do that? And I ended up having to, so I would be like, well, do you know what machine learning is? And they'd be like, yeah, right. In the way that like people don't like admitting that they don't know what something is. And be like, you like me to just give you a really succinct explanation for it? And they'd be like, yeah, that'd be great, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so like I'd end up doing that, which is actually how the children's book came about. Like I had young kids around the same time, and I got so used to giving these really short explanations that it became really a thing. It's shifted a lot now. So back then, like one of the fundamental issues with efficiency technology is does your audience feel like being efficient, right? And so when you're talking about law firms and other professional service firms, the answer is sometimes, right? Like some of them do. But I think some have like real questions about how that fits into their business model. And I think it can sort of take a lot of explanation. And part of the explanation is like, this is the way it's going to be, whether you like it or not. Like the efficiency is coming no matter what. And I think back in like 2015, 2016, 2017, when you could already see that AI could really help, like it could cut a review time by 50% or 70% or something like that. People would still be like, oh, I don't know. I think we could just kind of hold off. Whereas now, I don't think anybody really thinks they can hold off. And it's more about like thinking about how this is going to impact people. And I think, in fact, probably people have gone a little bit too far. Like Scott, as comments showed, is like probably not going to lose his job because he does like tons of useful stuff beyond what the AI can do. But I think there is today like just a lot more focus on how the AI works. Maybe, times when the AI doesn't work, times when the AI can sort of expose you to risk. But I think there's much more of a recognition today, as opposed to a decade ago, that like this technology is going to be part of how lawyering works. And we all just gotta kind of get used to that and figure out how to kind of embrace it and have it work for us as opposed to against us.
Yeah, I love how, and you speak to this in your book a little bit. I have read it.
What, the
Thanks for
children's
coming.
book? It's like 256 words. No, the real.
The other one.
Yeah, I'm just joking with you.
But you do speak about how AI is just sort of the latest technical advancement in a series of technical advancements that have helped lawyers for decades. You know, fax machine.
Totally. Like fax machine, like my dad was a lawyer. I remember him getting a BlackBerry early on. And like when you'd land on a plane and you just hear all the like BlackBerry chimes, and it was transformative. I think actually like one of the really interesting things about legal as compared to a lot of other sectors is legal gets a rep for being kind of like slow to adopt new technology, but I don't think that's actually true at all. I think with legal, definitely, I'm not going to say everybody is like, there maybe aren't as many early adopters of people who are like, I really would like to be on the bleeding edge. Like I think in surgery, for example, you have people who are like much more inclined towards that. But the interesting thing with legal is that once people start adopting, it can go really, really, really quickly. Like with Kira Systems, we had a few years where we went from like a few firms using to like a majority of the firms, right? Like I think now 70 of the world's top 100 law firms use the Kira technology for M&A and stuff like that, right? Like it goes really, really, really quickly. And I think an interesting thing about lawyers overall is like they do tend to do what others do once the others are doing it. And I think, yeah, fax, electronic legal research, BlackBerries, email, like all these things penetrated really, really, really quickly. Whereas in other areas like medical, I think you might have seen quicker early adoption, but actually a much slower journey to heavy adoption.
That's super fascinating. I'd never thought of it like that.
Yeah. So anyways, if you like more, check out and upside down. It actually like has a bunch of sort of like more detail on these kind of ideas about lawyers adopting and how it can fit in. Like the idea that maybe technology can help Scott review and negotiate a contract in 50% time, 50% the time, but that actually doesn't mean you need half of Scott and like all of a sudden like Northern Tool needs him to go part-time or something, but that actually maybe it enables him to do more work and actually even add more value.
There's always more work.
Always more work.
Almost more work. So Scott, because Noah sort of hinted at the fact that within LawVu, we use Zuva to extract information out of our customers' documents. I wondered if you could share some information on where you started with your AI journey. So once you learned more about it and once you sort of understood where it could add value, where did you start? And there's a question on the screen, which is, have you created a central source of truth, which is perhaps a bit leading, but have you created a central source of truth? And
Sure. Yeah. Sorry.
take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I do want to address a question that came in the chat asking for the link to the Great Learning MIT course. I'll put that in there before the end here so that everyone has it. But yeah, to your question, yeah, we have created a central source of truth from, kind of a contract repository perspective. I think like probably a lot of people on this call, a lot of in-house counsel, the legacy way to handle contracts might be a legacy CLM or even a Microsoft Windows filing system where you've got them broken down by vendor and supplier and different folders, and there's really no way to access the information that's in there without physically going in and searching those folders. And one of the things I learned about the background of these AI systems is that they're ultimately, even the LLMs, the generative AI that we interact with, they're built on a data set. Without the data in the background, there's nothing that these AI systems can do. The algorithms that they run on, the math that's going on in the background, it just doesn't work without a set of data to look at. So one of the reasons for building this central source of truth is building that background data set. So, in LawVu, one thing you're able to do, and I'm sure this is true of other CLMs as well, but you're able to put metadata in and assign it to each contract. So when we load a supplier agreement in there, we might want to track, how much did we spend or how much is this contract for from a spend perspective? What does it say about liability? And there's the AI tool that'll extract that data for you. That's a text base. But sort of building that and building those data sets, looking into the future, thinking if there's any way we can leverage that data to have, better contracting standards, better notification around renewals and expiration dates, better management of teams within Northern Tool that can use that data to help identify business areas where they might have gaps or where they might be overspending and things like that. It started with, we need to get these contracts in a place where from a legal perspective we can get a grasp on everything that we have, and that is transitioning to how can we use this tool to enable other teams to also do their jobs more efficiently and better.
Yeah, like data really is everything. As one of my colleagues said recently, and it just clicked for me, it's why wouldn't you want to use all of your prior work? Like if you can
Right.
store that somewhere, why wouldn't you want to store it somewhere and reuse it?
Exactly. And when you're particularly, when you're working with standard templates for your organization and you're looking to pull from, a catalog, you might have a clause library, but that's not going to capture every clause you've ever written, on that particular subject matter. You might have specific types of liability or indemnity clauses that might work for specific scenarios. And these LLMs and these tools that can search large amounts of data in a short amount of time really streamline that process. But you have to build it first. The data has to be there to access.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge difference between using your own data and using the internet.
Right.
So I guess throwing it back to you, Christina, in terms of your role at LexFusion, you're advising legal teams on where to start. What do you use AI for? Like, is it a magic tool that you're going to use it? Is it just going to come in and solve everything? Or are you going to focus on specific pain points? We've put a poll on the screen, which is sort of 3 key things that you could use AI for today: reviewing large volumes of contracts, reviewing third-party NDAs that are coming in, or sort of reviewing law firm invoices. People are using it for that too. Where do you tell your clients to start? Where do you start if you're at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the tricky things is that AI can go anywhere, right? So the first thing that we really need to understand is, what category are you trying to apply? What use cases do you have? Where do you feel you have the biggest pain points where there could be automation or more of a question and answer type relationship with the data that you have? So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about extracting information from documents, but are you trying to extract information from invoices? Do you want to research case law? Do you need to have something to help you create a first draft of something? Are you trying to analyze your deal transactions, predicting case outcomes, analyzing legal spend? So really identifying what the problem you're trying to solve with, and then understanding the market around that. So then you start with your market research, right? Well, can you build this in-house? That's a whole nother topic. I think we can discuss on another day. Do you build this in-house? But if you go to the market, who's in the market right now within that category? What are they doing? What are they delivering? There's a lot of hype in the market, but there are a lot of workhorses that are out there that are really driving and delivering solutions. So you need to do your due diligence on what aligns to your organization, the requirements of your organization. Onboarding something at a smaller mid-sized organization is a lot easier than onboarding something at a tier 1 financial institution. I always say we don't want to do anything that would bring down the global financial markets. So do you have that type of threshold that you need to overcome? And then identifying those couple of organizations that you think might be able to meet your business standards, and then doing a bake-off, right? So let's create that data set that you want answers against. Let's understand what those different solutions can provide against those answers, and do a bake-off with it manually. Sometimes the cost of doing a LLM or predictive AI just doesn't outweigh doing it manually, right? So if you've got 10 documents, do you want to onboard a predictive AI solution to analyze 10 documents? Maybe, maybe not. You just have to do a cost-benefit analysis. And typically what I found is that when you do a bake-off, oftentimes it'll be in a manually populated Excel spreadsheet against what that machine can populate. And 90% of the times I find that the robots come out ahead. Because oftentimes, especially when you're talking about complex or lengthy documents, human eyes get tired, they might miss something. Lawyers are tricky people, and sometimes they put something at the beginning of the document and then kind of negate it at the end of the document. And so the machine doesn't care. The machine doesn't have any preferences when it comes to, is this, what's this person trying to do? It just finds the information and puts it out to you. Then also important, and this is a critical step that I think a lot of people forget about, is after you do the bake-off, one part in creating your business case is dig into that organization. What's their funding like? Who's funding it? How much funding do they have? What's their organizational structure look like? What's their roadmap look like? Because oftentimes, it again depends on the size of your organization. If an organization doesn't have any funding, doesn't have any money, and you're expecting incredibly big results fast, are you paying enough in a licensing fee in order to help support that strategic direction of that organization? Or do they need to have some financial backing? So there's a lot of components that go into making sure that you're selecting the right tool, you're looking at the market in the right way. Because right now, I haven't seen a ton of overlap between, if you want something to analyze your contracts, it's probably not going to be able to analyze your law firm spend, right? So you really need to think about those categories and do a lot of due diligence around the vendors themselves.
When you're doing the bake-off, like sometimes it's going to be person versus AI, but a lot of AI systems are also there to supplement humans. So the right way to look at it is not necessarily going to be person versus AI, but person using the system versus people doing it the kind of manual way. Right. And like, I think the important thing that I'm sure Christina would echo is you got to think about like how you intend to use this, how maybe the vendor suggests you use this, right? Because despite all the hype, a lot of these systems are not meant to be just like a hands-off kind of put it into the system, get a perfect answer and file the perfect answer or whatever it is, but maybe have the system create a first draft of the spreadsheet. And like, is it a good job at creating a first draft of the spreadsheet? Maybe they have other tools like a document viewer where it takes you through the document, suggesting maybe where you should look, maybe with some false positives that you can get rid of. And I think it's just really important to think about how you're going to use this and talk to even the vendor, talk to consultants like Christina or others about how, even though Christina is not exactly a consultant, but kind of like is pretty consultative.
I'm here to have robots versus humans. It's robots and lawyers, because in those instances where the machine misses something, then the humans come back in and retrain the model, provide better data, or then take that data and do whatever needs to happen next. But yeah, no, 100% aligned.
And maybe the system's even supposed to miss things. Like in our system, we kind of intentionally set it up to have more false positives because we wouldn't like it to miss stuff. But if you're planning on doing it so that it's like hands off, like perfect results, it's actually not a great system for that, right? Because we've tuned it in a different way to generate false positives, because what we're trying to have it do is be a good human supplement.
Yeah, that's so relevant. It's like, I think one of the things that people often fail to appreciate is the value of a really strong UI as well, that's going to guide you through the process and get the best out of both the robot and the lawyer, rather than you can have the best machine learning model in the world, but if you're not presenting that information back in a UI that's going to really help someone do the job, you're going to lose a lot of that value.
Yeah, it's a really good time to almost like, I see Lisa has a question in the chat. Are there specific use cases or data points that are considered off limits or too risky for AI implementations? Like, I actually think that the AI can be a great supplement in a lot of cases, right? So even in like high risk, super material situations, the AI can be very helpful, but you just have to think about like, how are you using it? Like maybe it's not the AI like directly creating a piece of work product, but maybe it's helping you create a piece of work product. And maybe you'll only save 50%, 30% the time in that situation, but that's still like pretty meaningful and material. And the AI can still be really helpful there and help you do better work.
So where you're pulling the data from, and the data's source's openness to kind of the outside world. If you're using an AI model that is only internal and you've got your risk and control framework around it, you could probably go towards more of the restricted data within your organization. If you're using an open model that's just pulling information from everywhere and your data might be exposed somewhere else. So it really is kind of a risk threshold that you need to look at for your own organization, because they're very different for depending on, again, the regulatory oversight or the nature of your organization.
So I'm conscious of time we have not much time and a lot to talk about. So I want to move this conversation along and throw it back to the slide. Again, I'll skip this. We're running out of time, but a similar thing, right? Like focusing on those key values, like key things that you're doing every day, like where are you spending the time? And you touched on this, Christina. But I wanted to throw it back to you, Scott, so you can talk a little bit about the legal side of this. We've sort of talked a lot about how you enable your team to use AI, what you should be looking for in a legal tech tool. But the other side of the coin is, how do you empower your wide organization to use AI safely, knowing what you know? Where do you put the limits? If you're sort of tasked with ensuring the data security when your team is using these, how do you put limits in place? Do you ban it? Do you not ban it?
Well, you probably guess already that I'm not totally banning. No, we looked at that, and this was conversations. It wasn't just in legal, it was with IT and with leadership within our organization about how we were going to approach these tools, knowing that they're out there, particularly the publicly available generative AI tools, which we've all heard horror stories. Every lawyer knows about the two attorneys that tried to submit a chat GPT generated brief to court without reviewing it and reviewing the case law. And there's stories like that out there. But that really isn't chat GPT's fault or really generative AI's fault. That's a user error and not understanding the limits that are there before engaging with it. And so the approach we've decided to take here at NTE is enable but also inform about the risks and responsible use of these tools. And there's a number of ways to approach that. You can go with monitoring activity, but that becomes cumbersome. Really, we're about education here, and we've already had multiple internal seminars at a sales summit that we had. Myself and some folks from marketing and IT spoke in front of a lot of people from the company in a couple different sessions about how to empower their teams to use these tools in a responsible way. And one thing that I like to say about these publicly available ones in particular seems to be a big risk area and a big pain point for a lot of attorneys is I like to think of Chat GPT, the publicly available one, as a third party consultant who has not signed an NDA with your company. So what information would you share with that person? It probably very limited, very generic, very broad. It's good at idea generation. It's good at, getting the ball rolling, but you wouldn't want to put a bunch of proprietary data in there and say, what should I do with this? Because you could be putting it out there in sort of the broader data universe that other people are going to have access to. So, and then, working with IT, moving towards, Christina mentioned these sort of bucketed tools that are working off of data that's internal to your corporation or your organization and using those in a more open sense, but also notifying your users about the differences between those two categories. And then also the communication is important for fostering communication back with IT and legal when it comes to engaging with these vendors, running risk analysis and data analysis, making sure that before we sign a contract we've taking a look at their security terms and their data privacy approach as an organization. Maybe they have SOC compliance. Those are things you want to look into. That's a IT term for just general data security compliance. But having those conversations internally, being open and collaborative with the rest of your organization, I think is a better way to approach it than an outright ban. Because the fact is, your competitors are using it, your colleagues are probably using it, and a total ban is only going to lead to unregulated use. It's not going to lead to non-use.
Did you have a similar approach at Citi, Christina?
So we did. However, we're much more conservative in our initial approach with generative AI, and there's an incredibly complex framework around model risk management in the predictive space, and then bringing in the LLMs in-house to ensure that we had as much security protections around it, including, the types of data that we were even starting off with. So we are probably at the very far end of the spectrum in terms of slow and steady and conservative, but I think that's probably a good thing for an organization of that importance and of that size.
One other thing that would be relevant in like a Citi type organization, but might not as much be at another type of organization, is like the underlying LLM models, if you're relying on one of those, like they shift over time. And so something that worked and they generate different results just by their nature themselves. So like if you're relying on a generative AI kind of purely, you may end up in situations where like the same inputs don't necessarily generate the same outputs. And especially if you're at like a larger organization, you probably have like change management procedures and stuff like that, where you should think about that stuff.
You can even get a different answer 5 minutes later with the exact same prompt.
Totally. Like 5 minutes later, but even more so 5 months later.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So how do you control that? You can't control that.
Well, there's a way to control it, but it's like expensive and complicated. Like one of the, you can, if it's really high value for you, I think for a lot of organizations, you just kind of have to like go with a vendor. Like Christina and Scott were both suggesting, like you have to go with a vendor who you just sort of trust to be on top of these issues. Like it's something you can talk to them about and just see if it sounds like they've thought about it, like if they answered the question before. Is I think in a lot of cases a good vendor in a narrow area. Like if you're trying to do M&A due diligence contract automation type stuff, then we're probably a place that's thought about that a lot. And there's going to be other vendors who've thought about that a lot with, negotiation or with invoice review. And if you have a vendor where you think they've thought about it a lot and they're narrowly focused on it, they should be well positioned to do it. If you're like a large organization and it's a high value problem for you, like you're actually running the LLMs yourselves, there are things you can do. Like you could bring one of the open source LLMs in-house and you can kind of tweak it yourselves and run it yourselves. There's some significant costs involved with that. And there's some significant other minuses. Like honestly, a lot of the commercially available things like from OpenAI and Anthropic are pretty good. And if you're bringing it in-house, you kind of don't get some of the subsidized value that's there by doing it. But there may be situations like around change management and control where you feel like doing that heavy lift of bringing those things in-house. But you can't do that heavy lift unless you have the right personnel to do it and kind of enough money to do it. And it's a big enough problem. So I think ultimately I would suggest find a vendor that you trust to try to evaluate those problems for you, be using the right models, switch when necessary. And I think that's probably the right approach. Unless you're a place like Citi and it's like you're like some material algorithm, in which case maybe you bring it inside.
Yeah.
Christina,
So yeah.
Scott, does that sound about right?
I think that sounds about right.
Mm-hmm.
I love, Scott, you said something last week, which was, I think you said, don't be the first mover because then you're absorbing all of the risk, but don't go too late because then you're losing out on all the advantage. If you put yourself sort of squarely in the middle, then you're in a very safe spot. And maybe that's different. If you're Citi, maybe you're coming a little bit later where you're more risk averse. Whereas if you're not going to bring down the financial system, you could move a bit quicker.
I will say as a vendor, like you really do, and probably Ali, like I bet you if we talk to some people at LawVu, you really, earlier customers you love all your customers, but you definitely love people who take a risk on you early on, right? And do something and take a chance on you. And I think you probably go a little bit further, both in contractual terms and like pricing, but also just like there are people who I will always talk to now, like a decade later, because they kind of were really helpful in the early days. And so I think the lower risk option is certainly to be middle or later in the pack. I do think there's some advantages to going earlier with vendors, and you got to weigh what's right for your organization and right for you individually.
Yeah, and I think as long as the right control framework is around it, being early is a great thing because then you can help influence some directionally where some of the organization goes. So, conservative in terms of what kind of data is used, where your data is going, what the risk factors, but kind of having that partnership with an organization early is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, like if the place doesn't have SOC 2, you probably SOC 2 type 2, like maybe you shouldn't be sending your confidential data and stuff like that. Or like we said before, I would be pretty skeptical in many high risk use cases of trusting the AI to take it end to end and filing that information. But if you think about where your risks are, I think there can be some real rewards to working with vendors early on, even where, maybe they might be less adopted than other things.
Yeah,
So
it's all
if,
about.
sorry, you
Sorry,
guys.
just gonna add. I just want to echo the trust element. If you've got particularly existing vendors that you work with and you know how they operate, and particularly if your IT team has a lot of experience working with them and their interconnections. I mean, that goes a long ways to maybe newly marketed tools that they're putting out there.
So in terms of investing your time in that sort of exploration of a newer tool, as opposed to putting something in place that everyone's used before, M&A due diligence, till it's going to work. How do you, and Noah, I'd love your thoughts on this. Where do you focus? Like, how do you make sure you're going to get the reward out of that tool? Yeah, and you're not going to sort of spend a lot of time exploring something that's never going to do the job that you want it to do.
So I think the first thing to do when just thinking about tools and like what tools should you adopt is think about like what your problems are and like what do you spend the most time on? And some of the time that you spend is going to be like counseling internal clients. Okay, like that's probably not going to go away. Right, and like be reduced, and you probably wouldn't, like, maybe ChatGPT could help you draft internal emails or something like that, but that fundamental counseling clients is probably not going to go away. But if you look at your time, and like Scott sounds like he did this, right? Like he sat there, or his GC did this, or whoever, right? And said like, Scott spends a lot of time negotiating contracts, or Scott spends a lot of time, that data breach that we had where we had to notify everybody was really a pain, and it took us 2 weeks longer than we anticipated because we had to find all the notification rules around data breach or whatever. Like you think about either spots where you're spending a lot of time or spots where they could take up a lot of time for you. And I think then you go and try to find vendors who hit that specific problem. And then once you've got the sort of short list of people who hit a specific problem that's high value for you, then you can go talk to those places, do a proof of concept with 1 or 2 or maybe even 3. It's worth noting, like, many vendors are pretty good at like baking demos and stuff like that. So it becomes like worthwhile to like be thoughtful, maybe even ask different vendors how you might test the different softwares, because they will be able to give you tips and tricks. Like if you were trying to test contracts AI softwares, I could tell you a bunch of different things to look out for in terms of how people might fake a demo and make it look better than it actually is. And so you're going to feel like checking that out, and then try a few of the systems. Again, like we were saying before with Christina, like one of the really important things there is to test it the way you're going to use it, right? So if it is a software, again, I'm going to keep going to contracts examples because that's the thing that I'm most expert in. But if it is something where you're expecting it to like negotiate contracts or pull data out of contracts, are you expected to like, it's going to negotiate against the other side for you? Or is it something where you're going to be reviewing results that it pulls out? And is there an interface for that? And just test that out, see if it actually saves you time, see what happens with the accuracy. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a massive time investment. Like it could be something like you review 10 documents with it, or you review 5 documents. Like right now, we're internally involved in doing a speed and accuracy test that we're going to like write up, where it's just like, how much time does this save? So you can sometimes get things like that from vendors, but you should probably do it yourselves just to make sure that they haven't cheated, and just try it out for a bit. A lot of the times places will give you a free trial. Like if they don't, that's kind of sketchy itself. Some places will let you sign up for a free trial online. Sometimes you got to talk to the vendor. Generally, talking to the vendors is not a bad idea, since often they can be pretty expert in their area. So you can do that. And that's kind of the process. You may also feel like talking to friends, seeing if they have any experience, but I would definitely say that it's worth trying tools that you're pretty serious about, and then talking to the vendors and trying to ask different vendors how someone else might, things to look out for. Like
And one
someone else.
thing I just wanted to add to that, Noah, because you hit so many good points, is I always would ask the vendors, if you were to tell me today, what is your perfect use case to me, right? What could you deliver today and be excited about it? Because oftentimes people buy for roadmaps that may or may not come to fruition, or buy for customizations that they have created in their imaginary land that this vendor can do, but will never do, and then try to force the vendor to do it. So try to buy for what that vendor can deliver at that moment, and then grow and build with the vendor from there. But if you're buying for a future state, that future state may never happen.
Yeah, and I think vendors, like it's actually not in vendors' best interest to overhype some of this stuff. Like for us, we have a few use cases that we're really, really, really spectacular for, right? Like if you are another software company and you'd like to incorporate our technology in, like LawVu has done, we're really good with that. If you are an in-house legal department and you need to do large scale project-based contract reviews, like around an M&A deal, especially around an M&A deal, we're really good at that. But like, if you're looking for a CLM or something like that, you'd be much better going with some other tool. And I think if we were able to sell you on being a CLM, it'd actually be really dumb because you'd be really unhappy. And in like a year and a half, 2 years, like when renewal time came, you wouldn't renew and you'd talk bad things about us, right? So I think it's actually like immature vendors to kind of sell for things that they're not great at, but I still think it's like very tempting. You know, if you went to LawVu and you were like, I am the city legal department and I'm looking for like legal matter management and contract management, like there'd be a sales rep at LawVu who'd be like, oh, this could be like a $5 million a year contract. Like, you know, we should try to sell that. But it's like probably outside of LawVu's sweet spot, right? And the mature thing would be for LawVu to be like, you know, we try to serve our customers really well. We will try to serve you really well, but our typical legal department is probably, you know, Ali could tell me better, right? But I suspect it's not the city legal department.
Yeah, I can give you the whole spiel, but we don't have time for that. We're almost at time. So I think we should jump to Q&A. I can't remember if I didn't have any more slides.
Hey, everybody. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Christina, Ali, Noah, Scott. Wonderful discussion, great program. We have a few questions in the chat. I'm going to go through it, but I mean, Ali, tell us, you know, a quick elevator pitch. What's LawVu all about? And then we'll go to Q&A.
You put me on the spot. LawVu is a legal workspace for in-house legal teams. And as Noah said, we use Zuva to extract data out of our contracts, and Zuva is embedded directly within LawVu with a really nice UI. So it sort of sits in there and you can apply it automatically. Our focus is on serving in-house legal teams around the world of various sizes who really want to create that central repository of all their legal data, their matter management, so all of your legal intake, all of your contracts in one place. And then you want to connect, maybe you want to connect to AI tools that can help you with that. So we really help legal teams get control over intake, over contract management, and over spend.
Awesome. Great. And if people want to learn more about LawVu, you can say yes to the poll or you can scan the QR code. All right, on to some questions. So Sarah is wondering, do you have any tips for getting internal buy-in for a new AI tool? You know, any ideas how to get the, you know, conversation started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's all about, you know, showing value. If you're trying to get it for your team and you're trying to get approval up the normal pathways, I think you have to be able to show that it's going to be a value add, whether that's, you know, time saving, or if you can, it's hard to put numbers on these things, but just, you know, if you can show that it's going to add real value and have a lasting impact on the organization, I think that's a great way to go about it. You know, not just how it's going to help you, but how it might help the organization as a whole.
One of the things that you can try to do, depending on what that use case is, so depending on where you sit at legal, at the intersection of business and legal, or on the business side, is find that category that you think might bring value to that part of your organization, and reach out to some of the providers and potentially do a proof of concept, right? During the proof of concept, what you can do is you can understand what the product does. You can understand the value of what that product brings. You can understand the budgeting that will be required in order to bring that product into the organization. You can do kind of all of your due diligence during a proof of concept and take the results of that and present it up the chain. Again, there's a million different ways depending on with all the dependables on there, but that's a pretty safe way of creating that business case without having a significant commitment to a purchase or to bringing something on board. You know, to be fair to the vendors that you are going to go through this exercise with, you know, be very candid with them. Say, listen, I am trying to build a business case and the value proposition to bring something like this on board. Are you willing to go on this journey with me? Some of them will say absolutely. Some of them will say, you've got to pay us. Most of the time, depending on your logo and your buying power, you can probably get those proof of concepts for free, but just be fair to that provider and don't take up too much of their time if you know ultimately you're not going to select them, but have some conversations in the market. And that's a really good way to show value and to reduce some of that kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around that particular type of AI.
Got it. Another question, knowing that AI is here to stay, are there specific use cases or data points that are considered off limits or too risky for AI implementations? Is there any, use cases where you would say like, look, not yet?
I think we covered this a bit earlier when we said that if it's a high risk, high materiality situation or something like that, you should be using the AI as a supplement, not as a replacement. There's going to also be areas where the AI is just like not as built out and you might consider it. But I think if you're using it as a supplement and you know what its function is, then I think you should be okay. I think you also, as people like Scott have pointed out, you also feel like being thoughtful about data privacy within the AI, right? So like, there are AIs that you can pass confidential information into. There are AIs where like maybe you shouldn't do that and you just need to know what you're getting. But I think I wouldn't say there's any area that in and of itself you shouldn't use an AI on, even though I might be very thoughtful about certain areas.
And to your point, Griselda is chiming in the chat with a question just on that, where access will include customer PII or confidential information. How can we be sure this information won't be used in the AI's algorithm for future users and generally gain comfort? That our data will be adequately safeguarded. I think it's a trust thing. I don't think there's really anything, right? You can contractually mandate those provisions, but you have to trust that the vendor will honor those, safeguards.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely, that's a conversation you have in most of during the contracting process is how will my data will be used? How will it affect the product? And so you definitely have to have those conversations during the course of the evaluation. And then some of it might be trust, and then some of them will be safeguards on how you set up your interactions with that system, right? Do you have your own instance? Are you firewalled off? So there's a lot of considerations for that. But ultimately, how strong are some of those contracts around the agreements you have in place around that particular issue?
One thing I'd put on top of that is I think generative AI has caused a lot of people to be sort of thoughtful about some contract terms that maybe wouldn't have been sketchy in the past, but that one data point that I think a bunch of contracts had previously is it's like vendor is allowed to use customer data in these situations, right? And like one of the situations will be like, or access customer data, like, in case of a security issue or something like that, like that's pretty normal. Then you get to like bugs and it's like, maybe not. There's also a clause that a lot of contracts had previously that's something like vendor will be able to use customer data for product improvement purposes or something like that, right? And there's like a bunch of companies that I think have done sort of sketchy AI, like LLM training on top of that type of clause. And just so I would be thoughtful about your contracts and maybe even check some of your old contracts for if that type of stuff is in there. I think another thing is just trust. Like, does it seem like the vendor are people who are going to exploit that type of clause, or are they people who just kind of understand like where you're sort of on the same page in terms of what your usage will be of customer data?
Yeah, that clause I see all the time is anonymized, or cleansed data, some way. And I always try to make it a point, well, first to check with IT about what that might mean for them, what we're sharing, and then also getting clarification from the vendor about what that means for them. What are they using to anonymize that data? Can it be reverse engineered? Is my customer information going to be able to be discoverable because somebody's got another program that can go backwards on it?
Yeah, it's one thing if the anonymized data is like the person clicked on your whatever feature, but it's another thing if the anonymous data is like they're ripping out the pricing info and using it to create some like market pricing database, which is like not that wild of an idea in some cases, but it might not be something you're game to participate in.
Exactly.
Though part of it's trust, right? Like, do you think the vendor are people who might do that? Or are they not? Vendors can change control too. So even if you do trust them right now.
Agreed. All right. Well, Thank you, Christina, Ali, Noah, and Scott for a wonderful program. I want to kick it back to you each for just final remarks. If you want to say, thank you to the audience or whatever. Christina, we'll start with you for final closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Again, I have a lot of experience and I've learned some very hard truths. I've had some pretty interesting successes at Citibank and outside of Citibank. So if anyone ever wants to reach out to me and just kind of talk through some of your thoughts or ask some questions, I'm always available. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's keep this conversation going.
Echo a lot of what Christina just said. Thanks everyone for your time. I know you're all very busy. This is an important topic. It's probably not going anywhere anytime soon, and anything you can do to stay up to date and hear from people like myself, Christina, Noah, Ali, Shai, and feel free to contact me directly on LinkedIn and reach out with any questions, or if you just want to chat about AI and what it means for the future of your team or your organization, I'm happy to continue those conversations.
Right, Noah.
Hey, thanks for having me on here. I always enjoy speaking on Shy sessions. You ever feel like reaching out to me? I know a bunch about sort of contracts and AI, M&A and AI, and also starting legal tech businesses. That's about it. But do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if I can help at all, and I totally will. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And Ali.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and thanks to our panelists. This was an amazing discussion, and I'm really just glad to be able to host it on behalf of LawVu. Obviously, if you want to learn more about LawVu, reach out, scan the QR code. And if you want to chat about AI, I also have a ton of experience building and using and implementing AI. So ping me and we can chat.
All right. All right. Thank you again, Christina, Ali, Noah, Scott, LawVu, another amazing webinar. I hope everybody has a wonderful Monday. Happy Monday to everybody once again, and hope to see everybody back for more In-House Connect this week and beyond. So thanks. Have a wonderful day and a great week.